Good morning, friends, and welcome to June 6th, our concluding session now on forgiveness for our pastor's class for Sunday school. And we have extended ourselves a little bit over the conclusion of Sunday school by a couple of weeks. But that's okay because we needed to kind of get things done. And you can watch this at your leisure as it is archived. Just a couple of housekeeping matters before we get started this morning. First of all, as I said, this is the conclusion now to this particular study. We'll be done for the summer now as far as Sunday school. We will pick things back up in September. Now, our twice weekly Bible study will pick back up in September or so, give or take. And that will continue, I believe, on the format that we have had on Facebook, on the live stream. It just seems to me that that works better and easier and reaches more people than trying to do something live in person. Now that we have the technology and the minister is able to do so. But it raises a question of what are we going to do, what will we do for a pastor's Sunday school class starting next year. I'm anticipating next year, not written in stone, that by next September, coming September, we will be back to 2 services with Sunday school in between. Now, if that is the case, what do we do with this class? Because I believe it has reached a greater number of people because it has been done this way as a live stream on Facebook. Now, there is the possibility, because we are upgrading our internet and our live streaming capabilities, so that one of the problems we've had up to this point is that we have no internet over in the education wing of the building. That is being fixed. And so I would anticipate by September we would have Wi-Fi and therefore access to Facebook. As we have been meeting in the chapel, we could not only meet there live, we could also live stream it at the same time. Now that would require some experimentation, but well, if you have a thought on that, I'd appreciate hearing it. If some of you who are regularly part of this study and anticipate being so in the future, if you could just drop me a line or something, we could have a little dialogue on this and let me get your ideas and thoughts and preferences. I'd appreciate that. So the plan and the intention is to pick this class back up in the fall for me to be doing something. What shape it's going to take, what methodology it's going to utilize is up in the air. So we'll discuss that. Now, to finish up on the whole idea of forgiveness this morning, I want to start off by reading in the book of Genesis, chapter 50, and I'm going to begin at verses, 15 to 21. Let's get the glasses on here, that helps. Now, realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also wept and fell down before him and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." And in this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Now, the story of Joseph is the climax of the book of Genesis. It is arguably the most important part of the Genesis story because it gets Israel down into Egypt. It lays the foundation then for Moses and the people going out and becoming a nation. Now, some people may want to argue, well, no, Abraham and the starting up of Judaism is more important. You can debate it. But the positioning of the story of Joseph in Genesis marks it as the climax of the Genesis story. And so, one thing we notice, if you look at the people of Abraham, starting with Abraham, and go down the list of Isaac and Jacob, one of the things that you see, at least I see, is an extremely dysfunctional family. They are really, really dysfunctional. As you see Esau and Jacob, for example, what was going on between their mother and their father, and sibling rivalry, and then the family that comes back with multiple wives and multiple children, and Abraham and Sarah's relationship, and you bring into that a second wife, and everything that goes on there. You are talking about huge, in my mind, huge dysfunction. And so, just so you know, Joseph does not come out of a perfect family in no way, shape, or form. In fact, here's another part. Joseph was a part of another aspect of the dysfunction. He was the favored son. Out of all the sons there, he's the favorite. So much so, and their father, son of his beloved wife, the first wife, and he showed favoritism. Joseph was given the coat of many colors as a sign of his father's favoritism, the amazing Technicolor dream coat, as it's called in the Broadway musical. And the resentment, favoritism within a family, that's exactly what it does. It creates resentment. If you've been involved in a situation like that in your family growing up, you know what I'm talking about. It's like the old Smothers Brothers routine. Tommy and Dickie Smothers, Mom always liked you best. And there's, no doubting it. Mom always liked Dickie best. But, and they have a whole routine where they give examples of that. You had a bike. Yeah, well, you had a scooter, only had one wheel. You had a pet, a dog. You had a pet, a chicken with only one leg. On they would go. But resentment builds when you show favoritism. And in this family, it grew to the point where the older brothers decided they'd had enough, especially when their brother came to them. See, he was a dreamer, and he interpreted dreams. He had that gift. And he tells them, you would think that Joseph would be smart enough to keep it to himself. But he has this dream of each brother has a sheaf of wheat, and he has one, and in his dream, his brother's sheaves bow down to his. The interpretation being that his brothers would bow down to him someday. Now, that was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so they decided to kill him. He's coming out one day to check on him during sheep shearing. And they say, let's take his coat, tear it, tell father that a wild animal attacked him, dip it in some goat's blood, and, we'll kill him, and that'll be the end of it. So they throw him into a pit. Now, not all the brothers are in favor of killing him. Reuben, I believe, who is the oldest, is against it. And he goes along with it, but his thinking is that he's going to come back later when the other brothers aren't paying attention and pull younger brother out of the pit and avoid anything. However, Judah, yeah, Jesus is of the line of Judah. You would think Judah is good and upright. Judah comes up with the idea saying, hey, there's some Ishmaelites over here, some slave traders. Instead of killing him, and that's all we get out of it, let's sell him, which they do. They sell their brother as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. And off he goes and says, now we can tell Dad that we'll rip up his coat and dip it in blood and say he was tackled, killed, and eaten by a wild animal, which they do, which is not only cruel to their brother, it's cruel to their father as well. So off down to Egypt, Joseph goes as a slave. And you know his story. He's sold to Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife takes a strong liking to him. He refuses her to the point where she becomes a woman scorned, and she reports him for trying to rape her, which he did not do. She tried to rape him, and he gets thrown into prison for something that he did not do. So there you go. Joseph has gone from slavery into prison. There, though, his gift of being able to interpret dreams serves him well, and two of the servants of Pharaoh, the cupbearer and the baker, are thrown in as well, and they have dreams, and they are interpreted, and one of them gets out, and one of them is executed. And when one is let out, I believe it was the cupbearer, he says, now remember me, that I've done you this good. Well, the cupbearer kind of forgets about Joseph until the Pharaoh starts having dreams and wants to know what they mean, and his magicians cannot interpret them because he says, you tell me the dream and then interpret it for me. Well, they can't tell him the dream because they don't know, because they're fake. And so the cupbearer says, I remember a guy in prison, let's bring him in here. So Joseph tells him what the dream is and then interprets it for him. Pharaoh is so impressed that he makes Joseph prime minister of all of Egypt. So Joseph literally goes from the outhouse to the penthouse, and very, very quickly. Now, part of the dream of Pharaoh that Joseph interpreted was that there was going to be a great 7-year famine that was going to come to Egypt. They'd have 7 years of great results, great crops, and then 7 years of famine. And that the Pharaoh should store up stores so that not only would the Egyptians have food, but also everybody would come to Egypt. And the world, the area, would be saved because Egypt is ready for this. So in the process of that, when the famine hits, after 7 years, and Joseph 7 years as prime minister, the famine hits, and so his brothers are forced to come down to Egypt to buy grain, to buy food. And so Joseph has been betrayed by his family. And maybe, he might have been 12 years old when it happened. He might have been older, but let's say that. When he's sold out by his brothers. And now he's had to endure years of slavery. We don't know how many. We don't know how long he was in prison. The false accusations and everything. If it were me, if I'd have been in that kind of situation, the last thing on my mind would have been love for my brothers. Let me tell you, it just wouldn't have happened. If they were responsible for all of that, I'd be looking for payback. I've got a younger brother, so sorry, Jeff. You probably would be too. Most people would be looking for payback. So, but this begs the question now. What about you and your family? Have you been betrayed by your family. We're talking about forgiveness. One of the hardest things to forgive, one of the hardest things to get your head around, are wounds that have been inflicted by family members, by those that are closest to you. Parents, unfortunately, inflict a variety of different kinds of wounds on their children, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Siblings can and do the same thing. We've been talking about the metaphor of a backpack and filling it with pebbles and larger rocks and medium-sized rocks and larger rocks yet. Siblings do that all the time. We put pebbles into each other's backpacks, and sometimes we clean them out and we seek forgiveness, and sometimes we don't. Family systems are complex. Some are more complex than others. And the stones can be of a variety of sizes, right up to awesome boulders, terrible wounds that get inflicted. Sexual abuse, for example, psychological abuse, neglect, abandonment, all those kinds of things. Adam Hamilton, the writer of this study, suggests that even in family situations, you should attempt to utilize RAP. Remember, we talked about that. RAP means, number one, remember your own shortcomings, assume the best of the person, and pray for the person. It's hard to stay angry with somebody when you're praying for them and when you're praying about the situation. But now, what about the big stones? I mean the really big stones that happen inside of family structures. As I said, abuse of whoever kinds. And there's also children who abuse parents. Okay, let's not forget that as well. Again, if you have that in your life, do have prayer, support groups, therapy, counseling, confrontation, but make sure you do it in a controlled setting. Don't try to do it on your own. Do it with help. All of those things can be helpful. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. And what about forgiving somebody or working through a situation with somebody who's dead? You have a parent, for example, that was abusive, and they're gone now. They passed away. You never resolved the situation. You never got any satisfaction from the situation. Adam talks about one person who took a picnic basket and a bottle of wine and a chair to the grave of their parent who was abusive, and sat there for a couple of hours and had a conversation with them. You say, well, they're dead. How can you have a conversation? Well, number one, God is there. Number two, God may allow that person to be listening in to the conversation. And three, it's good therapy. It's good therapy to be able to unburden yourself. Is having that kind of a conversation crazy? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You need to be able to do whatever you need to do to work things through. Whether it's a person who is gone, if it's a person at a distance, write a letter, send an email, make a phone call. Some things should not be trusted to any of those mediums. They need to be dealt with face to face, in person, verbally, if you can. Sometimes, if it's a situation where there was abuse, I would suggest don't go alone. Go with somebody that you trust, somebody that can make sure that things stay kosher and on an even keel. But sometimes going and having those conversations is the most therapeutic thing you can do. And just remember, if the other person, if the other party won't take ownership, won't confess, repent, or ask forgiveness, that type of thing, that's okay. You've done your part, and that's very therapeutic. So, and remember, the other person may not be listening, but God is. God is listening, and God can work and do amazing things therapeutically. Now, we don't know, going back to the Joseph story, we do not know exactly how long Joseph was a slave or in prison. He had the gift, I said, of being able to interpret dreams. That gets him out of prison, and it also gets him into a place of power. And we know that he was prime minister at least 7 years to get ready for the drought. And how long the drought lasted, the drought was supposed to last 7 years. How long into that it took before his brothers came down to Egypt looking for food, we don't know. It was probably relatively soon. But he's in prison. And in prison you got a lot of time to think. You think he was thinking about the fact that I'm here is because my brothers betrayed me? Nights, sleeping, trying to sleep in Potiphar's house, the reason I'm here is because my brothers betrayed me. Somehow, Joseph was able to give him his anger and his pain over to God. And as a result, not a result of the fact that he gave his pain to God, but his life did come full circle. And that's the point of the story, that he had the opportunity to do dirt to his brothers, to retaliate, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And no one would have blamed him, because if once his story comes out, all he would have had to do is go to Pharaoh and say, these are my brothers and this is the reason why I'm here. It's their fault. They betrayed me. I really would like some justice here. And because he's in his favored position with Pharaoh, he could have done that. But looking back on the situation and seeing where he is at that point in time as prime minister of Israel, he looked back, and instead of seeing pain, anger, and betrayal, he saw the hand of God working in all those things. He gave those things all over to God. He trusted God to bring something beautiful out of something that was totally ugly. Paul, the Apostle Paul, talks about that in Romans, where he says, in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. The ultimate example of that is Jesus Christ, Jesus' death on the cross, bringing about the redemption of the whole world. Out of something horribly ugly and terrible, the greatest of all possible goods came. So, forgiveness. Forgiveness is believing the future can be better than the past. The past doesn't change because of forgiveness, but it believes that God can do something redemptive with it. The result was, in this situation, Joseph's brothers asked for forgiveness, and he gave it. If you want to read the story for yourself, backtrack a few chapters from chapter 50 in the book of Genesis, and I think the story starts about chapter 46 or so in Genesis. And there's an interesting thing. They tell the story of the betrayal, and then before they pick up the story of Joseph in Egypt, there's a chapter there about Judah and Tamar, which is really kind of interesting because it juxtapositions Judah, in case you're thinking, well, Judah maybe wasn't so bad because instead of having his brother killed, he sold him into slavery. No. We're going to tell you the story about Judah just to let you know what kind of a guy he really was. So there's that. And then the story picks up again on the other side of that particular story. It's actually, in the story of Judah and Tamar is actually very interesting. I think you'll find it interesting. If you want to spend some time, go and read it. I'd encourage you to do so. But as a result, Joseph's brothers asked for forgiveness, and he granted it. He forgave them. You intended it for evil. God used it for good. Forgiveness is powerful. Forgiveness is beautiful. It's probably one of the most beautiful of all things. And we need it. We need forgiveness because we sin. We all sin. We are all sinners, as we remember when we go through the liturgy of communion. We remember that we are sinners, that we need a Savior. We need to be forgiven. And Jesus Christ is that Savior, the one that we claim this day. We need it because we are sinners. We need forgiveness. And also then, as we receive forgiveness, we are transformed. As we offer forgiveness to others, they're transformed. And by offering it, we ourselves are transformed. So it happens twice over. In receiving, I'm transformed. In offering it, I'm transformed as well. Because you can't fake it if you're going to offer forgiveness to somebody. It's got to be the real deal. And when it is the real deal, it's transformative in your own life. South Africa. I keep going back to that particular example, and it's not a metaphor. It's true. What happened in South Africa after they finally got rid of apartheid, and they were trying to figure out what do we do now in a shared government with the people who committed atrocities against the native black Africans, because there were people who tortured people, who murdered people, who stole from people, who subjugated people. What are we going to do with those people? And South Africa, through primarily Nelson Mandela, but particularly Archbishop Desmond Tutu of the Episcopal Church, decided that South Africa has no future without forgiveness. And they set up what they called truth juries, truth councils, tribunals. And they had adjudicators, people that would come in. If people would come in, and a lot of people did, tens of thousands of people, mostly white folk, came in and confessed to their atrocities and things that they had done under apartheid. And they confessed them, and they asked for forgiveness. They were granted forgiveness by the indigenous African black folk. And the transformativeness of that is absolutely, as you read the stories, there's Desmond Tutu wrote a book a number of years ago, about 1999 or something like that, called exactly that, No Future Without Forgiveness. I'd encourage you to read it. It's very interesting. They tell stories there of people asking for forgiveness, confessing their crimes, and the people coming in that they had committed these crimes against, and those people saying, I forgive you for what you did to me and to my family. Incredibly powerful stuff. One of the most powerful books I've read in the last 20 years of my ministry. I would commend it to you, especially if you are struggling and dealing with the whole idea of forgiveness. If there are people that you need to forgive and you're just thinking, man, I just don't know if I can do that. No Future Without Forgiveness, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, spelled T-U-T-U. Desmond Tutu. That's our study on forgiveness. And if you have questions, you can email them to me. I can address them under the guise of Ask the Rev, and perhaps create some kind of a forum for discussion. But this has been a good class. I appreciate your support and participation. There's been a lot of questions and things that have been brought up. I appreciate them. And I just hope now that the Lord blesses you real good today. Okay? See you in the fall. God bless you.